I'm Jeremy, 36 male. I live with my fiancée, Olivia, in a city apartment we designed together, a quiet sanctuary of clean lines and natural light. By day, I'm an architect, a job that suits my personality perfectly. I build things that are logical, stable, and meant to last. My life is structured, predictable, and calm, a stark contrast to the chaotic family I grew up with. For years, I believed that maintaining peace with them was worth any price. Until one Christmas, they asked me to pay with my own sanity, blaming me for a disaster my brother orchestrated. They almost succeeded in convincing me I was the broken one, but they forgot one crucial detail about me. An architect never forgets the original blueprint. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The annual Christmas gathering at my parents' house was always a production, orchestrated by my mother, Helen, with the precision of a seasoned theater director. Every ornament had its place, every meal was timed to the minute, and every person had a role to play. My father, Mark, was the affable host, deflecting any potential conflict with a joke and a heavy pour of wine. My role was the stable, successful older son, the one who proved they'd done a good job. And my younger brother, Kyle, had the most cherished role of all, the prodigal son, the charmingly unpredictable creative who could do no wrong. No matter how many jobs he'd lost, relationships he'd wrecked, or family events he'd nearly derailed, he was always welcomed back with open arms and a clean slate. My role was to be the steady anchor. His was to be the exciting storm they loved to watch, so long as it didn't cause any real damage. This year felt different. I was bringing Olivia to the family Christmas for the first time as my fiancée. We'd been together for 3 years, and while she'd met my family on several occasions, this was the first major holiday. She was brilliant, a corporate lawyer who was as sharp and logical as she was warm and empathetic. She saw the world in terms of evidence and intent, a perspective that was about to clash spectacularly with my family's preference for emotionally driven narratives. I had warned her, of course. I'd given her the rundown. Mom manages everyone's feelings, Dad avoids confrontation, and Kyle is a walking landmine with a hair-trigger temper and a victim complex. Just smile, nod, and don't engage with Kyle if he starts, I'd advised, feeling a familiar knot of preemptive anxiety in my stomach. Olivia had squeezed my hand. I'm on your team always, we'll handle it together. The first day, Christmas Eve, went surprisingly well. The illusion of a happy, functioning family held strong. My dad was thrilled with the vintage watch I got him, and my mom cried when Olivia gave her a framed photo from our engagement shoot. Even Kyle seemed to be on his best behavior. He was managing a trendy new bar downtown, a job he hadn't been fired from yet, and he regaled us with stories of unruly patrons and celebrity sightings. He was in his element, the center of attention, and for a while it was pleasant. Olivia was a natural, asking my dad about his golf game and complimenting my mom's decorating. She was polite but observant, and I could see her quietly taking in the dynamics, the way my mom would cut off my dad's stories to recenter the conversation on Kyle, or how my dad's laughter was always a little too loud after one of Kyle's less funny jokes. The centerpiece of my mother's Christmas display was an antique German pyramid carousel, a delicate wooden structure my grandfather had brought back from the war. It was 4 tiers of hand-carved angels and villagers that spun slowly from the heat of the candles on its base. It was her most prized possession, a fragile link to her own father. Every year, the ceremonial lighting of the carousel candles was the official start of Christmas. All gather in the living room, drinks in hand, and watch the faint warmth set the fragile wooden blades spinning. It was the one moment of genuine, peaceful tradition that I cherished. But this year, Kyle had decided it needed an upgrade. "It's so slow, Mom," he'd said earlier in the day, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass. "You should get a little motor for it or something, make it spin faster." My mother had just laughed it off. "Don't be silly, dear, it's perfect the way it is, it's delicate." That evening after dinner, the moment arrived. My mom asked me to light the candles, a job she'd entrusted to me since I was a teenager. As the responsible one, I was the only one she trusted not to drip wax on the carvings or set the curtains on fire. I carefully lit each of the 6 small candles, and as the heat rose, the top propeller began to turn. The familiar, gentle creak of the wood-filled quiet room, it was perfect. We all stood there for a moment watching it spin. Then Kyle, who had just returned from the kitchen with a fresh drink, stumbled. It wasn't a big stumble, more of a lurch, but it was enough to send him bumping hard against the small table holding the pyramid. The entire structure wobbled violently. A collective gasp filled the room. One of the tiny carved angels on the second tier broke loose from its wire mount, fell, and was immediately snapped in two by the rotating platform below it. The delicate wooden wings of the propeller cracked against the tier above it as the whole thing shuddered to a halt. The room was plunged into a stunned, horrified silence, broken only by the faint sizzle of the candle wicks. My mother's face crumpled. It was the first crack in the perfect holiday illusion. The silence that followed the crash felt like a physical weight. My mother, Helen, let out a small, wounded sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, wide with shock, were fixed on the broken angel and the stalled wooden pyramid. For a split second, everyone looked at Kyle. He was standing right there, his hand still resting on the table he'd bumped into, a look of comical surprise on his face. It was obvious what had happened. He had been careless, fueled by a few too many whiskeys, and had broken the most precious object in the room. I saw the sequence of events as clearly as a blueprint. Kyle stumbles, table shakes, pyramid breaks. A simple, undeniable chain of cause and effect. I braced myself for the explosion, for my mother's tears and my father's awkward attempts to smooth things over. I expected Kyle to launch into a flurry of half-hearted apologies mixed with excuses. But that's not what happened. Kyle's expression shifted with lightning speed from surprise to indignation. He pulled his hand back from the table as if it were red hot and took a step away, creating distance. Then he turned not to my mother but to me. "Jeremy, what the heck?" he said, his voice loud in the quiet room. "You put it too close to the edge." I was completely thrown. I hadn't moved from my spot by the fireplace, a good 5 feet away. "What are you talking about, Kyle?" "You bumped into the table." He scoffed, shaking his head and looking around at our parents for support. "No, I didn't. I barely touched it. It was already wobbling. You must have knocked it when you were lighting the candles. It's been unstable this whole time." It was such a blatant, nonsensical lie that I almost laughed. But then I looked at my parents. My mother was now looking at me, her initial shock curdling into disappointment. My father, Mark, was avoiding my gaze entirely, his eyes fixed on the floor, his jovial host persona evaporating before my eyes. "Jeremy," my mother said, her voice trembling, "were you not being careful? I told you how delicate it is." The accusation was so surreal I could barely process it. "Mom, I was nowhere near it," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and rational. "Kyle literally stumbled into the table. We all saw it." I looked to Olivia, who was standing beside me. She nodded, her expression a mixture of shock and quiet fury. She opened her mouth to speak, but my father cut her off. "Now let's not point fingers," he said, stepping forward and putting a comforting arm around my mother. "The important thing is nobody got hurt." It was his classic conflict avoidance maneuver, but the damage was already done. The narrative had been set. Kyle, sensing his advantage, pressed on. "I can't believe this. I was just walking by. Jeremy, you're always so clumsy with this stuff. Remember that vase in the hallway when we were kids?" He was dredging up a 25-year-old memory of me accidentally knocking over a cheap vase while we were wrestling. It was a classic Kyle tactic, deflect with a vaguely related ancient anecdote to paint me as historically incompetent, and it was working. My mother's focus was now entirely on me. "Oh, that's right," she said, nodding slowly. "You've always been a bit forceful. You're strong, you don't always know your own strength." Suddenly, I was being psychoanalyzed for a crime I hadn't committed. My entire life of being careful, of being the responsible one, was being erased in favor of a narrative where I was a thoughtless bull in a china shop. "This is insane," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "He is lying to your faces and you're letting him." Olivia stepped forward. "Helen, Mark," she said, her voice calm and firm, the way I'd heard her speak when she was dissecting a legal argument. "With all due respect, Kyle was the only person next to the table. Jeremy was over here with me." Kyle rounded on her. "Oh, here we go. His lawyer fiancé is going to defend him. Look, I don't want to fight. It's Christmas. All I'm saying is it was unstable. Jeremy was the last one to touch it. End of story." My father seized the opportunity for an exit. "He's right, son, Let's just drop it. It's a thing. It can be fixed. Let's not ruin Christmas over a broken toy." A broken toy. He had just dismissed his wife's most cherished heirloom as a toy to avoid confronting the truth about his favored son. The gaslighting was so thick I felt like I was choking on it. They weren't just ignoring the truth, they were actively rewriting it in real time, and they expected me to accept the new version. My mother, wiping a tear from her eye, looked at me with a pleading expression. "Jeremy, please, just apologize. Let's move on." Apologize? The word hung in the air. Apologize for something I didn't do, to absolve my brother and restore the family's artificial peace. Every fiber of my being screamed no. It was wrong, it was unjust, and it was a betrayal. I looked at Kyle, who was now staring at me with a smirk of pure triumph. He had won. He had created a mess and successfully framed me for it, and our parents were his willing accomplices. I looked at Olivia, and in her eyes I saw a reflection of my own disbelief. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't do it." But then I looked at my mother's tear-streaked face. All she wanted was for her perfect Christmas not to be ruined. In that moment, the years of conditioning of being the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, took over. Swallowing the acid taste of injustice, I heard a voice that sounded like mine say the words. "You're right, I'm sorry. I must have bumped it when I lit the candles. I'm so sorry, Mom." My mother's shoulders slumped in relief. My father clapped me on the back. "That's my boy. Now who wants another drink?" The illusion was restored, and I was now officially the villain of the story. The rest of Christmas Day was a masterclass in collective denial. Everyone acted as if the incident had been resolved, with my apology serving as the final word. Kyle was magnanimous in his forgiveness, patting my shoulder and saying, "Hey, don't worry about it, man, it happens." My mother treated me with a gentle, slightly condescending kindness as if I were a child who had learned a valuable lesson. My father kept the drinks flowing and the conversation light, steering it away from anything that might disrupt the fragile truce. On the surface, it was a picture of holiday harmony, but underneath, something had irrevocably broken, and it wasn't just the wooden angel. It was my place in the family. I felt like a ghost at the table, a character playing a part that had been assigned to me. I was the clumsy, thoughtless son who had ruined a precious heirloom. Olivia was my only anchor to reality. She sat beside me, a silent, supportive presence. She didn't challenge my family again, knowing it would only make things worse, but every time our eyes met, she gave me a look that said, "I know the truth, you're not crazy." During dinner, while Kyle was loudly recounting another exaggerated story from his bar, she discreetly took my hand under the table and squeezed it 3 times, our little code for "I love you." It was a small gesture, but it kept me from completely losing my grip. The gaslighting was relentless and insidious. My mom would say things like, "Be careful with that platter, Jeremy, it's heavy," or my dad would joke, "Better let me carve the turkey, son, we don't want any more accidents." Each comment was a small paper cut, reinforcing the false narrative that I was the source of the chaos. They were cementing the lie into our family history, and I was expected to smile and accept it. The most disorienting part was how effective it was. By the time we were eating dessert, a small, treacherous part of my brain began to whisper, "What if they're right?" The united front of my parents and brother was so absolute, so unwavering, that it began to erode my own certainty. I replayed the moment in my head 100 times. Did I get too close when I leaned in to light the back candles? Did my jacket brush against it? Was it already wobbling when I got there? I am an architect. My entire life is built on precision, on understanding spatial relationships, on being meticulous. The idea that I could have been so careless with something so important felt alien to my very nature, yet the confidence with which my family accused me was making me question my own perceptions. This is how gaslighting works. It's not just lying, it's creating an alternate reality and insisting on it so forcefully that the victim starts to believe their own mind is failing them. That night, as Olivia and I lay in the guest room bed, the silence of the house felt heavy. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I shook my head, unable to speak for a moment. "No, I feel like I'm losing my mind, Liv. They were so sure. What if I did do it and I just don't remember it right?" Olivia sat up and turned on the small bedside lamp, her face soft with concern but her eyes sharp and clear. "Jeremy, listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "You did not do it. I was standing right next to you. I watched the whole thing. Kyle and only Kyle bumped into that table. What you're feeling right now is a textbook response to intense gaslighting. They created a narrative that protected Kyle and served their need for a simple resolution, and they forced you into the role of the villain. Do not let them make you doubt what you saw with your own eyes." Her certainty was a lifeline. She was right. I knew she was right, but the emotional weight of my family's conviction was a powerful force. "My own mother looked me in the eye and essentially called me a liar," I said, the words tasting bitter. "She chose to believe him over me instantly." "It wasn't about belief," Olivia explained, shifting into her psychologist-adjacent analytical mode. "It was about convenience. Kyle is volatile. Confronting him would have led to a huge, ugly fight, and that would have shattered your mother's idea of a perfect Christmas. You, on the other hand, are the peacemaker. You're predictable. Blaming you was the path of least resistance. It was easier for them to sacrifice your feelings than to deal with his tantrum. It's a pattern, isn't it?" She was right. It was a pattern, one that had been playing out our entire lives. Kyle would create a problem, and I would be expected to help fix it or absorb the fallout to keep the peace. When he wrecked his first car, I was the one who had to cost him the loan for his next one because his credit was shot. When he dropped out of college, I was the one who had to sit with my parents and convince them it wasn't the end of the world. My responsibility had been twisted into a tool for their convenience. I had always been the designated shock absorber for my brother's recklessness. This time, however, was different. This wasn't about money or a bad decision. It was about my character and my sanity. They hadn't just asked me to clean up a mess. They had declared that I was the mess. A seed of doubt had been planted in my mind, yes, but hearing Olivia lay it all out so clearly planted something else too, a cold, hard knot of anger. They had pushed me too far. The peacemaker was starting to realize that the peace he had been keeping was a lie, and it had been kept entirely at his own expense. Lying there in the dark, I knew I couldn't let this go. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to find a way to prove what really happened. My sanity depended on it. We left my parents' house on Boxing Day under a cloud of strained politeness. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for being the bigger person, Jeremy. It means the world to me that you kept the peace." The words meant to be comforting felt like another turn of the screw. She wasn't thanking me for my sacrifice, she was praising my complicity in their lie. The 2-hour drive home was mostly silent. Olivia knew I needed time to process, and I was lost in a fog of anger and confusion. The architect in me, the part that craves order and logic, was at war with the son who had been programmed to crave his parents' approval. When we finally got back to our apartment, our sanctuary of order and calm, I felt a desperate need to find something solid to hold on to, a piece of evidence that could anchor me back to reality. Olivia, ever the pragmatist, said, "Okay, let's approach this like one of my cases. What are the facts? What is the evidence?" The problem was there was no evidence. It was my word and hers against the united front of my family. There were no cameras in the living room. It was a closed-door event where the jury was biased and the accused had already been sentenced. "There's nothing, Liv," I said, sinking onto the sofa. "It's just their story against mine." "Let's re-examine the crime scene then," she said, pacing slowly. "Think like an architect. You know the space. You know the people. Walk me through the entire evening, every detail from the moment we arrived." So I did. I described who was standing where, the conversations we had, the flow of people in and out of the room. We talked about Kyle's increasing volume as he drank more whiskey, my dad's position by the bar, my mom's flitting around the room. We mapped it all out in our heads. But it still led nowhere concrete. For the next week, I was a wreck. At work, I found it hard to focus. I would stare at blueprints of perfectly structured buildings, but my mind was consumed by the crumbling foundation of my own family. The gaslighting had left a residue of self-doubt that I couldn't scrub away. I started questioning other memories, moments from my childhood. Was I remembering them correctly, or had my family's version of events slowly replaced my own over the years? It was a terrifying feeling. I knew I needed something tangible, a piece of indisputable proof. Without it, this incident would just be absorbed into the family mythology as the time Jeremy broke Grandpa's carousel, and I would be forced to live with it foe. Revere, the anger was simmering, becoming a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just doing this for my own peace of mind anymore. I was doing it because letting them get away with it felt like a betrayal of myself. The breakthrough came on New Year's Day. We had decided to stay in, ordering takeout and watching movies, wanting to start the year in peace. Olivia was scrolling through photos on her phone from Christmas Eve. "You know, your mom's decorations really were beautiful," she said, showing me a picture she had taken of the fireplace, and then I saw it. In the corner of the photo, sitting on the mantelpiece, was a small, black digital voice recorder. My dad. He was a gadget enthusiast, always buying the newest tech. A few months earlier, he had bought the recorder to digitize his memories, as he put it. He'd been trying to record his father's old war stories before he passed and had gotten into the habit of leaving it on during family gatherings to capture conversations he might want to listen to later. He mostly forgot about it, but he often left it running. "Oh my God," I whispered, pointing to the device in the photo. "The recorder, I completely forgot. Dad always leaves that thing running." Olivia's eyes lit up. "Jeremy, if that was on, it would have recorded everything," I finished, my heart starting to pound. "The conversation, the stumble, the crash, all of it. The sound would be the evidence. An audio recording would capture the truth in a way that couldn't be denied or twisted. We would hear where people were standing. We would hear Kyle's lurch, the distinct sound of a body hitting a table, followed by the crash. We would hear the immediate aftermath, his voice, my voice, all in their raw, unedited reality. This was it. This was the blueprint of the event, but how to get it? I couldn't just ask for it. My dad would get suspicious, and if my mom or Kyle found out, they would surely erase it. I had to get into that house and retrieve the recording without anyone knowing. My mind started racing, laying out a plan. My parents were leaving for a week-long cruise to the Bahamas on January 4th. They always asked me to stop by the house once or twice to check on the mail and water the plants. It was the perfect opportunity. I would have the house to myself. I knew where my dad kept the recordings. He had a small office in the basement where he downloaded the audio files to his old desktop computer. He was meticulous about labeling them by date. The file for Christmas Eve would be there. Suddenly, I felt a surge of clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The fog of self-doubt began to lift, replaced by the cool, calculated focus of an architect designing a project. I knew the layout of the house, I knew my father's habits, and I had a key. The plan was simple, clean, and achievable. Olivia looked at me, a small, determined smile on her face. "So you're going to get it?" "I'm going to get it," I confirmed. "And then they're going to hear the truth." The peacemaker was done. The architect was about to start building his case. The days leading up to my parents' cruise were agonizingly slow. I played the part of the dutiful son, calling my mom to wish them a safe trip, listening to her talk about the shore excursions she was excited about, all while the secret plan churned in my stomach. The apology I had given at Christmas had worked almost too well. My family had fully settled back into our old dynamics, with the added benefit of having a new piece of leverage over me. During one phone call, my brother Kyle got on the line and said, "Hey, I'm having some people over next month. Try not to break anything if you come," followed by a smug chuckle. He felt untouchable. He had no idea that the foundation of his victory was about to be systematically dismantled. On the morning of January 5th, the day after their flight left, I drove to my childhood home. The familiar journey felt different this time, charged with a sense of mission. As I turned onto their quiet suburban street, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and righteous anger. This house, the place where I was supposed to feel safest, had become the scene of a profound betrayal. Letting myself in with my key, the silence was absolute. The air was still thick with the scent of pine from the now undecorated Christmas tree sitting by the curb. My first stop was the living room. The small table was back in its place, but the German pyramid was gone, likely sent off for repairs or hidden away in shame. The absence of the object at the heart of the conflict was a stark reminder of what had happened here. I stood in the spot where I had been accused, visualizing the events again, this time with the cold clarity of someone gathering evidence. Then I went down to the basement. My dad's office was exactly as I remembered, a controlled chaos of old computer parts, golf trophies, and meticulously filed paperwork. The old desktop computer sat on the desk, humming softly. My heart hammered against my ribs as I woke the computer from sleep mode. I navigated to the folder labeled Family Recordings. My dad's filing system was thankfully impeccable. Inside were dozens of audio files, each named with the date. I scrolled down, Deck 24 Christmas Eve, WAV, there it was. My hands were trembling slightly as I double-clicked the file. I plugged my headphones into the jack, not wanting the sound to travel through the empty house. The recording started. I could hear the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, my dad's booming laugh. I listened to myself talking to Olivia, my mom directing people for a photo. It was all there, a perfect audio snapshot of the holiday illusion. I fast-forwarded to the evening, my finger hovering over the mouse. I found the moment we all gathered for the lighting of the pyramid. I heard my mother's voice, "Jeremy, would you do the honors?" I listened to the scrape of the match, the soft whoosh as each candle was lit. I could hear my own footsteps as I stepped back towards the fireplace, towards Olivia. Then I heard a new set of footsteps approaching the table, heavier, less steady. I heard the clink of ice in a glass, followed by Kyle's voice slurring slightly as he spoke to my dad. Then came the crucial moment. A distinct shuffling sound, a loud, solid thump, the sound of a hip or leg hitting a wooden table, and then the unmistakable, sickening crash of splintering wood and the tinkling of the small metal chimes on the carousel. A collective gasp was clearly audible, then silence. A few seconds later, Kyle's voice, loud and defensive, erupted from the headphones directly into my ears. "Jeremy, what the heck, you put it too close to the edge." It was all there. The lie captured in perfect high-fidelity audio. The recording continued, documenting every word of the subsequent argument. My own confused protests, my mother's immediate pivot to blaming me, my father's attempts to shut down the conflict, Olivia's calm, ignored defense of me, and finally my own beaten-down, coerced apology. Listening to it was both vindicating and sickening. It was the ultimate proof, but it was also a permanent record of my family's willingness to sacrifice me for their own comfort. I saved a copy of the file to a small USB drive I'd brought with me. Then, to be safe, I emailed the file to myself and to Olivia. The evidence was now secure in multiple locations. Now that I had the proof, the question was what to do with it. My initial, angrier impulse was to just email the file to all of them with the subject line, "Listen to this." But Olivia, my brilliant legal strategist, advised a more deliberate approach. "This isn't just about proving you were right, Jeremy," she said when I called her from my car. "This is about changing the dynamic for good. A surprise email will cause an explosion, but it might not lead to any real accountability. They'll just find a new way to spin it. You need to control the narrative. You need to present your evidence in a setting you control." She was right. This couldn't be another chaotic, emotional free-for-all. It needed to be structured, deliberate, and undeniable. It needed to be a presentation of facts, not a declaration of war. My profession gave me the perfect metaphor. I wasn't going to demolish the family. I was going to expose the faulty foundation they had built everything on. If it collapsed under the weight of the truth, that was a consequence of their poor design, not my demolition. So we began to plan. The next major family gathering was Easter, about 3 months away. It was the perfect timeline. It would give them plenty of time to cement their false narrative, to believe they had gotten away with it completely. It would also give me time to prepare. My presentation wouldn't be just an audio file. I would create a timeline of events. I would prepare my statement. I would decide what I wanted the outcome to be. Did I want an apology? Did I want them to admit they were wrong? Or did I just want them to know that I knew the truth and that I would never be their scapegoat again? I decided it was all three. I would design the confrontation with the same precision I used for a building. I would lay the foundation with the undisputed facts, build the structure with the audio evidence, and finish it with a clear, non-negotiable statement about my future relationship with them. This was no longer just about a broken Christmas pyramid. It was about rebuilding my own life on a foundation of truth, even if I had to do it alone. The family meeting at Easter would be my groundbreaking ceremony. The 3 months leading up to Easter were a strange sort of limbo. On the surface, I maintained contact with my family. I took my mom's weekly calls, listened to stories about her garden and dad's golf game, and even had a few brief, stilted conversations with Kyle. To them, everything was back to normal. The Christmas incident was a closed chapter, a minor hiccup successfully smoothed over by my maturity. They had no idea I was quietly assembling a case against them, that every pleasantry I offered was filtered through the cold, hard knowledge of their betrayal. It was a difficult role to play, but Olivia and I agreed it was essential. The confrontation had to be on my terms at a time and place of my choosing, not a preemptive strike born of anger. Olivia was my co-conspirator and strategist. We rehearsed it. We went over what I would say, how I would say it, and we prepared for every possible reaction. Would my mother cry? Would my father shut down? Would Kyle explode with rage? We planned for all of it. Olivia's legal training was invaluable. Present the evidence first, then your statement, she advised. Don't let them interrupt or derail you with emotional outbursts. State the facts, play the recording, and then tell them what the consequences are. This isn't a negotiation, it's a verdict. Her support was unwavering. She was ready to stand with me, but we both agreed that I had to be the one to deliver the message. This was my family, my history, and my stand to make. The invitation for Easter dinner came as expected from my mom. We'd love to have you and Olivia, she said, her voice cheerful. It will be a lovely, quiet dinner, just the five of us. It was the perfect setup. No extended family, no outsiders to complicate things, just the core members responsible for the lie. When the day arrived, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. In my pocket, I had my phone with the audio file saved and a small, powerful Bluetooth speaker no bigger than a coffee mug. When we arrived, the scene was eerily similar to Christmas. My dad handing out drinks, my mom bustling in the kitchen, and Kyle lounging on the sofa, scrolling on his phone. The Holiday Illusion version 2. We made it through the appetizers with forced, polite conversation. I answered questions about work, Olivia talked about a case she'd won, and we all pretended we were a normal, happy family. Finally, as my mother was clearing the plates before bringing out the main course, I made my move. Actually, Mom, before we continue, I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the chatter. There's something I'd like to address. Could everyone please have a seat in the living room for a few minutes? The request was so out of character for me that it immediately silenced the room. My mother looked confused, my father wary. Kyle rolled his eyes, but even he seemed intrigued. They all migrated to the living room, settling into the same spots they had occupied on Christmas Eve. I stood before them with Olivia standing slightly behind me, a silent pillar of support. I took the small speaker out of my pocket and placed it on the coffee table. On Christmas Eve in this room an incident occurred, I began, my voice devoid of emotion. My mother's antique pyramid was broken. A story was created about how that incident happened. The story was that I was clumsy and careless and that I knocked it over while lighting the candles. I was pressured into apologizing to keep the peace. My mother started to speak. Jeremy, we don't need to rehash this. I held up a hand. Please let me finish. To my surprise, she fell silent. For the last 3 months, I have lived with that story. I have been treated as the person responsible, and for a time you all did such a thorough job of convincing me that I almost believed it myself. I started to question my own memory, my own sanity, but then I remembered something. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I remembered that Dad has a habit of recording our family gatherings. I saw a flicker of panic in my father's eyes. He knew immediately what I was talking about. Kyle's smug expression faltered, replaced by a look of dawning horror. My mother just looked utterly bewildered. I have the audio recording of the entire incident from Christmas Eve, I stated flatly, and I would like for us all to listen to it together. Without waiting for a response, I connected my phone to the speaker. I didn't play the whole thing, just the crucial 2 minutes. I hit play. The sounds filled the silent room, my footsteps moving away from the table, Kyle's unsteady approach, the clear, loud thump of impact, and the tragic sound of splintering wood. And then Kyle's voice, undeniably his, launching the lie. Jeremy, what the heck, you put it too close to the edge. We listened to my confused denial. We listened to my mother immediately taking his side. We listened to my father's dismissal of the heirloom as a toy. We listened to my coerced, defeated apology. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. It was more profound, more damning than the silence that had followed the crash itself. No one could speak. The truth in its raw, auditory form was now an undeniable presence in the room. Kyle was ashen-faced, staring at the floor. My father wouldn't look at anyone. My mother had her hands over her mouth and tears were streaming down her face, but these weren't the tears of a victim, they were the tears of someone who had been caught. I let the silence stretch for a full minute before I spoke again. The lie ends today, I said, my voice resonating with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The narrative that I am the problem, that I am the one who needs to be managed or forgiven, is over. I looked directly at my mother and father. You chose the easier path, not the right one. You sacrificed my well-being for your comfort. You protected the person who caused the damage and blamed the person who has always tried to hold things together. That is a profound failure of parenting. Then I turned to Kyle. And you are a coward. You broke something valuable, and instead of taking responsibility, you chose to frame your own brother. You let me take the fall and you enjoyed it. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and shame. Jeremy, it was a stupid joke. It wasn't a joke, I cut him off. It was malicious, it was cruel, and it's the last time you will ever do it to me. I picked up the speaker and turned to Olivia. We're going to leave now. My mother finally found her voice, a choked sob. Jeremy, wait, please, I'm sorry, we're so sorry. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at them, three broken people sitting in the ruins of their own deception. I hear your words, I said, but what I've learned is that your words don't mean anything. From now on, I'm only going to pay attention to actions, and it will take a long, long time for any action to convince me that you understand the damage you have done. With that, Olivia and I walked out the door, leaving them behind with nothing but the truth and the deafening silence that followed. Walking out of my parents' house that Easter felt like stepping out of a pressurized chamber. I hadn't realized how much weight I'd been carrying until it was suddenly gone. The drive home was quiet, but this time it wasn't a heavy, anxious silence. It was a peaceful, contemplative one. I had spoken the truth. I had presented my case. I had redrawn the boundaries of my own life, and for the first time I felt truly in control of it. Olivia reached over and put her hand on mine. I am so incredibly proud of you, she said, and in that moment her validation was the only thing that mattered. She was my family, the one I had chosen and who had chosen me back based on trust and respect, not obligation and dysfunction. The fallout was immediate and predictable. My phone started blowing up within 30 minutes. First came a string of frantic texts from my mother, a jumble of apologies, excuses, and pleas for me to come back and talk. It was a misunderstanding, one text read. I was just so upset about the pyramid, I wasn't thinking clearly. It was a classic attempt to minimize her role, to frame it as a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a deep-seated pattern of behavior. I didn't respond. Next came a call from my father. I let it go to voicemail. He left a short, awkward message. Son, we messed up. I'm sorry. Your mother is very upset. Call us. His apology, as always, was filtered through my mother's feelings. He wasn't sorry for what he did to me. He was sorry that his wife was unhappy. Again, I didn't respond. The most surprising communication came from Kyle a few days later. It was a long, rambling email. He didn't try to deny what he did. He admitted he had lied, that he had panicked, and that he was used to mom and dad cleaning up his messes. He said he was ashamed of himself. He apologized. It was the first time in his life he had ever offered me a genuine, unqualified apology for anything. He said he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. It was a flicker of accountability, but I knew that one email couldn't erase a lifetime of behavior. I appreciated the sentiment, but trust, like one of my buildings, requires a solid foundation. His was non-existent. I maintained my silence for 2 full weeks. I needed the space to let the dust settle, not just in their house, but in my own head. I needed to decide what I wanted my relationship with my family to look like going forward. The old one was demolished. What, if anything, would I build in its place? Olivia and I talked it through at length. She never told me what to do, but she helped me understand what I was feeling. I realized I wasn't filled with a desire for revenge anymore. I just wanted peace, a real peace, not the fragile, artificial peace my family had always championed. I wanted a life free of gaslighting, blame-shifting, and emotional manipulation. Finally, I wrote a single collective email to my parents and brother. I kept it short and to the point, like a formal architectural addendum. I wrote, "Thank you for your recent messages. I acknowledge your apologies. However, the events of this past Christmas were not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a long-standing and unhealthy dynamic. The trust between us has been broken, and it cannot be repaired with words alone. For my own well-being, I need to take a significant step back. Olivia and I will not be attending family gatherings for the foreseeable future. I am not closing the door forever, but if we are ever to have a relationship again, it will require a fundamental change in how we interact, and that change will have to be demonstrated consistently over a long period of time. The responsibility for rebuilding is now yours. I will not be participating in the construction." I sent it and felt a profound sense of release. I had laid out my terms, the ball was in their court. The months that followed were quiet. My mother tried to call a few times, but I let it go to voicemail. She eventually started sending short, simple texts just saying, thinking of you or hope you're having a good week. There were no demands, no guilt trips. My father sent me a birthday card with a handwritten note that just said, I'm proud of the man you've become. It was a start. Kyle, true to his word, didn't contact me. I heard through a cousin that he had started going to therapy. Whether it would stick or not was anyone's guess, but it was an action. Olivia and I got married that autumn. It was a small ceremony, just our closest friends, held at a beautifully restored historic building downtown. We didn't invite my family. It was a painful decision, but a necessary one. We couldn't start our new life together under the shadow of their dysfunction. On our wedding day, a courier delivered a package to our hotel. It was from my parents. Inside was the German Christmas pyramid, meticulously repaired. There were no visible cracks, and the broken angel had been replaced with a perfect hand-carved replica. Attached was a simple card, wishing you a lifetime of happiness built on a foundation of truth. We love you. It was the most honest thing they had ever said to me. It didn't fix everything, but it was a load-bearing wall where there had only been drywall before. The lines of our family had been redrawn. The old structure was gone, but for the first time there was a chance to build something new, something smaller and more distant, perhaps, but something honest. And for an architect, honesty in design is everything.